You don't want these. If you don't want these, move along. So nice to climb partway up a mountain and turn around and look down and be higher than everybody and enjoy the view and talk to everybody and forget that there's higher to climb. It's even nicer to get near the top of the mountain and go back down and say, I climbed to the top of the mountain. It's much harder to climb to the top of the mountain. Be still. Realize it's not the top of the fucking mountain. Understand it's not a mountain. Spiritual ascendancy, spiritual enlightenment looks like a mountain, looks like climbing a mountain to those who are starting on the ground. But the first lesson to embrace, less on. You turn this down a little by recognizing you are already fundamentally shaping your reality and have become a primary influence on what you do to experience what happens next. So essentially, we're living within collective structures which teach us to conceptualize mountain in terms of how to get higher. When you do that, you see someone else through this lens and you can interpret, you can imagine that they've gotten higher than you. And then you are immediately shaping reality around this concept. In reality, it's much closer to a kaleidoscope, a particular configuration of consciousness. And to get your configuration of consciousness in tune is more like a combination lock. To make that work, you need the key. I offer keys. I have an apology and a warning. First of all, I'm sorry. It seems to me that I've attracted a couple dozen people who actually do understand enough to learn these things. And I've been trying to speak to a wider audience, knowing full well that most folks can't comprehend these themes. So I've been trying to build the bottom foundations. And then I've been very frustrated that other people are working with the same foundations. I don't believe they're doing as good a job. So they're introducing, fundamental steps that they've taken. I can tell they've taken the steps, but I feel like they're not including enough perspective and enough warnings, and they are asserting things that are mistakes, that are part of their ego, part of their own personal experience, and they're throwing those in the bucket as like, learn this too, but really it's sort of a coping mechanism they're asking you to buy into. And I've been frustrated that my own sort of more carefully crafted simple first steps haven't been getting anywhere. And I think the past several days have shown me it would be much more valuable for me to simply speak to the advanced class. First of all, I enjoy this more. I really do. It's just, it was not on my agenda. I sort of thought we had to get here over the course of years of more work. It's kind of exciting to consider maybe that's not necessary. My father is a professor of education for decades, and he was really good. I can tell how much his students love him still. And he always valued teaching the introductory courses. I think it's still important that I attempt to do that and, consider that maybe I just have to, bail on the investment of whether they succeed or not, but just put that work in for those who do come to it and scale back my assessment of how broadly this can spread. In truth, when I started my channel, I hopped on to some classically lovely blonde YouTube guru. She's a blonde woman who's also a YouTube guru, and she seemed to know a fair amount of what she was talking about. So I popped through, impress the lady, I'm gonna get 2 billion followers. Honestly, I don't really give a shit. I want to succeed. I want to thrive. I want to feel like I'm pushing my edge and doing my best. And quite frankly, 20,000 subscribers who actually know what the hell we're doing together would be far more interesting to me. So let's go for that. I'm going to try this. Let those who have ears hear. Gaia has multiple configurations of consciousness that have some degree of stability. Consider the respect you might accord to many different teachers in many different traditions as different configurations of consciousness. Some elements of these configurations are similar. So it could be interpreted like a kaleidoscope with a similar coherence to its pattern. When the kaleidoscope has an incoherent pattern and it keeps moving in an unpredictable way, you can't build a life with much influence over the world. So it's sloppy, and your own power doesn't focus in a way that can be creative. When you do tune in to a consistent configuration of consciousness based in the coherence of your diet, the coherence of your practice, the way you take care of your body, whether you do work that you find appealing, all of these elements are sort of foundational. And you can get away with ignoring some if your goals are focused in a particular way. But at the end of the day, there are certain ways in which you will simply never become aware if you ignore fundamental challenges to how you're living your life. There are two thresholds which I'd like to talk to you about today that are, I think, a wonderful introduction to an advanced class. One, the quickening. This is one of my first channelings from Thoth. He explained it to me, and it remains a fundamental piece of my spiritual architecture. Get rid of the three-dimensional model. It remains a fundamental. Oh goodness, everything comes back to this. Life is a balance between giving us power and putting us in a position to fit into society. If you give us too much power, we will manifest our fears. This is the very simple thing that you can work with. So the reason we deal with healing first is because when you're wounded, you remain afraid of the things that hurt you. And when you're afraid of the things that hurt you, those things are more likely to manifest. If Gaia turns up your capacity to manifest what you visualize or bring into focus with your consciousness, if you have too many fears and pains, you will manifest those things. Seems simple. Think of how this plays out. It dramatically increases the importance that you place on doing your work. You have to look really deep into yourself and realize that everything that you might be really happy to have gotten over is not necessarily gone. So the immediate challenge is that you're going to have to kind of go back and clean up a mess that you thought wasn't a mess. You just threw a carpet over a mess, and you've been standing on it. It kind of smushed down the things underneath, and you're like, "Hey, this is fine. I'm great. You're so happy to get through that painful time that going back into it seems like no way." And I'm here to invite you into the understanding that this is crucial. Now, you don't have to be paranoid. You just have to be willing. Yesterday, I went through yet another migraine. Wasn't terrible by any measure. I've gotten far more competent at being present with it. And when I am, I'm very aware that essentially it's a sacred time. My energy is being turned up. And when my energy is turned up, all of the tensions within myself that are normal, that I'm used to dealing with, become heightened. And when these tensions are heightened, I must deal with them. Think about how simple this is. Attention, first of all, you have to understand that this is how it's working. Tensions that are normal to you get exaggerated. They're not getting worse. You're feeling more. So they're not changing. You're getting more into your body. And if you get into more into your body and almost immediately discover there's a contradiction in the way the forces are working within you. Before you were numb, before you were sort of avoiding it, before it was like the mess under the carpet, now it's right in your face. If your reaction is stop it, I want this to be over, oh, well, guess what? You're a very powerful being. You are saying, turn it down, turn it down, turn it down, turn it down, turn it down. And you are operating in direct rejection of the part of yourself that on other occasions says, enlighten me, enlighten me, enlighten me. I want to learn, I want to learn, I want to learn, I want to do the work, I want to do the work, I want to do the work. This is how simple it is. But it's years. It's years of work we're talking about here. And this is all after spiritual awakening. You've already prioritized your awakening. You've already prioritized staying with your flow. You've already hopefully prioritized some version of a practice, being healthier, getting yourself more in control of your time. At the very least, you have to be doing something you love. So I think it's very possible for people to be spiritually awakened in a career, but it has to be true to you. When you're awakened on any level, you really can't do much that's out of harmony with yourself because it hurts too much. It's the same principle. You can't remain aware of much at all. You can't keep the power turned on within you because the consequence of being more present to these forces creates a very obvious emphasis on the contradictions, and you have to resolve those contradictions. So what you need to do is be willing. You hold your willingness, and this is more frightening. You know, there's something tempting to say, okay, I'm going to go find it. I'm going to go pull up the rug and do the work. You can try, but I promise you part of this comes not on your timing. Because one of the fundamental principles here is that Gaia has a weather. There's a weather to spiritual awakening that's trying to unite us. It's trying to weave us together. So it's not entirely up to you. You're saying, I want to raise my sail so I catch the wind when the wind comes. And it's more frightening because you're saying I'm prepared, but you have to remain somewhat on deck. You're ready. You have to teach yourself how to be ready. And then these forces sweep through as they did for me yesterday. And I walked for 5 hours barefoot in the woods and breathed. And it rained on me and it felt really good. And I needed to ask my father to spend time with my son, and my wife's mother came and had dinner with them because I really needed the space. And I have a life where I can set aside what else is going on and do this. But please understand, it's a very deep surrender. It's not like, oh, I'm so free, I get to play in the woods. No, I had to fucking play. I had to be there. And I was in pain. I was in pain, but I was also in joy. And I was very conscious of this dynamic where I was like, I wasn't praying for it to be over. I was praying to do the work that I need to do during this time. It's very different. Sarah, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Yes. Haldi, Aya, I'm so glad. You guys are great. Sarah, yes, the time is healing. And I don't know if this is what you're referring to, but it's sort of what I wanted to say next. That when you let go of some of the control and you simply say, I want to be ready, there's a process that unfolds during that wait until the wind arrives. And that process is doing some work on its own. So you're allowing an energy to move within your body that it's kind of like, you're not as much of a driver. You're going to be called to task. You're going to be recruited into involvement because some steps are very necessary. You need your participation to help catalyze certain changes. And in that time that you're waiting for the wind to come, things can get set up so you'll be more prepared for that wind. And the gift of that is very profound. This is a complete thought. If you have questions about it, I welcome them. And I'm going to move on to another theme and perfectly willing to weave them together. An element that I have found to be utterly crucial to my sanity is the recognition that the people who love me are here with me on other planes. So your soul family can talk to you all the time, and they are. And in that, you begin to reveal an extraordinary and excruciatingly beautiful dynamic whereby teams of us, our family is a team. And on a certain level, we've chosen roles before life, before our lives began, as we incarnated. And I was someone who volunteered or got drafted into being, I'm going to bring this consciousness into present state. They led me into it from their higher selves. So more of their soul is centered in their higher self. So when I ascend this mountain that I referred to at the beginning, this is what it feels like when you're coming from a grounded state that's kind of asleep and you think about learning about spiritual enlightenment. It feels like you're ascending a mountain, and you can slide down and you have to climb back up, and you have to be careful about your footing and where you rest your trust and your consciousness and your intention. So it's a good analogy for how it feels. And then you get to near the top, and you could just go, whoa, this is awesome. You learn some stuff and you go back down and you say, oh, I went to the top of the mountain, and you tell other people about it. And this happens all the time. Artists do this, teachers do this. It's amazing. It's very healthy in plenty of ways, but it's all still within this mountain metaphor. If you stay near the top, you do stuff like you learn to fast. You learn to develop a lifestyle that's apart from everybody else. You fast from media. So you create space in your consciousness to listen. And you don't make reckless choices, because this is a time when all sorts of intense things can come up, particularly if you make space. If you remove the rhythms of your life, so you're not going to a job every day in the same sequence, and you're not eating a lot, or you're not eating, even just eating simple foods rather than complex foods, and you're not meeting a lot with your friends, and you're not watching a lot of shows, now there's space. Well, the reason people don't do this more often is because all of our fear and pain comes up. So first of all, this is a wonderful way to create space to heal. And you have to do it intentionally. You make this space and then you anticipate. You're like, bring it, bring it. What's going to happen? And then when negative feelings arise, you're approaching them with some momentum and a center that says, I want to deal with this. I want to heal. Now, there are lots of more layers on how to do this and what to do. I'm not going to address them in this moment, but I'm very available to do so over time. And just creating the space with the intention to, you're going to keep going. Not only are you going to keep going, you anticipate that in the heightened state, it makes sense that pain would arise. This is the river and the stream, Kundalini awakening video that I made quite a while ago. And I highly encourage you to use this metaphor because it's really powerful. It's the sense that as we turn our energy up, problems come to the surface, and it's supposed to work that way, and you're going to stay with the strength and the intensity and keep going. Now, if you do this enough, and for everyone this is different depending on your karma, but if you cleanse your pain and your wounds enough, this space becomes open. There is an availability within yourself to listen even more deeply. Think of it like you're lining up mirrors or lenses. You're lining up lenses, and while you're focusing them, you just can't see through, because each lens is a different frequency and it represents, you could have wounds on them. But as you heal, the lens is clear and you can see through them to something much deeper, much deeper. And in this depth, several things happen. Now, the first thing that should happen, and this probably happens to you already sometimes, is you get messages from spirit guides and angels. Now, initially, that is stark. Like, it'll stand out. Once you get to a certain level of awakenedness, that something about their messages will be different enough that you can recognize it as a different message. Over time, as you clarify and heal more and more, you can maintain a more constant message. So it's sort of like the evolution of, initially we created telegraphs, right? Or initially we had letters. You'll get a letter from an angel, and you're just going to have to hold on to that letter. You know it's special, but you don't, you can't keep it going. It only arrives every so often. Then you get the telegraph. The telegraph could get little messages through, but it can do it frequently and it can do it quickly. It's an entirely distinct state. And this is a very effective metaphor for how it actually works in my experience. And then what you're doing is you want to be at peace with the stage you're in. I promise you, you only advance to a more coherent and faster pace of communication when you complete the lessons that you've already been given. So you get a lesson in a letter, you don't just hold it, you work with it, you integrate it. And when you've completely integrated it, you'll get another letter. When you do enough work on that level, you've clarified yourself to the point where you can get a faster connection. And then you start to be able to ask questions. And you're only going to be able to get simple answers. You say, should I go on a walk today? And you get simple answers, but you can start to do things like this. And this phase lasts a while, and you need to integrate your ability to ask questions whenever you need to and respect the answers. Because honestly, hearing the answers can be very challenging. One of the biggest challenges to all of this communication is being able to discern the difference between your own bullshit and the actual answer. Creating contrast, contrast works in computer, visualization in the screens. If there's not enough contrast, you can't tell the difference between your own neuroses, your own opinions, your own preconceptions, your own projections, and an angelic communication. And this is totally it's not my metaphor, par for the course. This is totally normal. It's normal to have this challenge, and you shouldn't be depressed about it. You should take it on. You're trying to learn to see the difference and create that contrast, because until you do, it's all just shades of gray that sort of blend into each other. And the only way to do it is to forge in. If you think it's an angelic message, treat it like an angelic message. See how it works. You start to ask questions. Is this person someone I can trust? You have an intuition. You think it's an intuition. Yes, I can trust them. So trust them. See how it goes. If it doesn't work, you go, okay, I guess something about my deduction was incorrect. And you just have to keep doing this over and over again. And over time, you create contrast because you're able to recognize, I went with that. I thought it was an angel's message. I went with it. Lo and behold, it didn't work. Don't say fuck you to the angels. I mean, you can, but you're going to muck up your connection. Say, I gotta learn to interpret more clearly. Just get back to work. Now, here's the other side of this. This is where, I've been in a petulant firestorm the past several days, in case you hadn't noticed. The next level this is a whole world. And it's a very humbling world. And maybe that's why we don't see it talked about much yet. But it's time to talk about it. You break through the next level when you can have conversational connections with angels. And guess who you're going to find? Your fucking family. Your own family. Your soul family. And I bet you this goes for a lot of you. That the people who love you, the people in your life who have stuck with you through confusion and pain, or are sticking with you now through confusion and pain, are right there. And they sound like angels. Okay? Because it's their higher self. They're far more aware. They're far more conscious. They're far more present than you are. Boom! Humility. Humility. I have no earthly parallel for me. I don't see other teachers who know what I know or sharing what I'm sharing. So it's been a little bit challenging coming to terms with who the hell am I in this mess? And Fatima's recent comment about being a pioneer beyond a gift that was divinely gifted to me to help me stay centered in my work. But the way I've stayed centered until now is I hear the voices of my soul family daily. And I ask them questions daily. And in that communication, I stay humble because I know that I am present here in my body and I'm reaching into frequencies, and they simply, their soul is more centered in those frequencies already. Immediately gives you an entirely different perspective on how to consider yourself in the world, right? Because the point is we're climbing together. We're creating this together. You are not a unique autonomous individual in the same manner that other people believe. And there's no such thing as a uniquely enlightened person, because other people They're entirely dependent on other people to sort of be embracing situations with them and help you stay centered and become who you are. And as a result, when my wife tells me that yet again I didn't squeeze out this sponge and it's wet on top of another sponge and she thinks it's gross, I treat this as really important because she helps me stay grounded. And there's a beauty in it that's beyond compare. And periodically, she will make a verbal statement from that space. She will speak to me from an extraordinarily enlightened perspective as the person who is incarnated multiple times with me. And then she's like, oh, I said that? I forget I said it. And it's beautiful. And it's totally centering. And it just recreates a vision of reality. Now, if another teacher doesn't know this and doesn't work with it, they've got so much more to learn. They've got so much more to learn. And I invite you to start to consider yourself in this light. That there are people around you who maybe you've been putting pressure on to understand you more, agree with you more, what have you. Take that pressure off. Find the understanding elsewhere. Find it here. Don't put that pressure on them because likely as not, they're trying to connect to you from a different space in a different way. And you're missing them where they are. You're missing their soul. Their soul is reaching to you. And when you connect with their soul in such a way, you won't feel as lonely about it. And you will feel more humble and more empowered, and you'll make a lot more progress. This ends today's advanced class. I'm glad to take this approach. I'm glad to free myself up to talk to you in this way, and I'm looking forward to how that will play out. Much love be with you and your family.